Didn't wait for Barb because I think she's on a walk, so she can't connect.
Okay.
Yeah, don't wait. Yeah. She can review the beginning from the recording.
Yeah.
She'll zone in. Yeah.
Good. So we're recording, and now we're gonna share screen. Just a second. All right, and we're off and we're running. Okay,
Yay.
so last week, one of you asked me a very perceptive question. Are Mongolians Asians? And that led me to see if I could explain what the heck is going on with Mongolians and Asians and Huns and Turks. And let me give it a try. So it's not simple. So I'm going to start with the genes, right? Let's start with genes. That's pretty basic, right? We got data on genes. We can see how genes flow. And some people believe in the blood in the genes dictating everything. And what I'm here to tell you is genes schmeens. Genes are very haphazard. They're not going to help us define at all what civilization is, Juan Jose. We're only looking for stuff that tells us what civilization is, and genes and blood do not do that. Now, I'm going to try to simplify this craziness. I don't expect you to know any of this, but I want you to notice two things. Human beings entered into the area of China and North Asia in two waves: the northern route out of Africa and a southern route out of Africa. And notice there are some Indo-Aryan peoples here that snuck in. And we've talked about the Indo-Europeans and how they're distinct. The two groups I just want you to look at today are the grouping of the Altaic peoples and the Han people. The Han. And the Han were in the Yellow River civilization. They're very small on this map, but when we do the language and when we do the civilization, they're going to loom very big. So Altaic people. So, who are they? Well, they're the Mongol people. They're the Turkic people. And they're totally separate from the Han, totally separate. And if you look at Japan, as some people in this group like to do, you're going to see that they have more to do with the Altaic people than they do the Han people, at least in terms of genetic flow and most importantly, language. And you notice that it is the Altaic people that contribute the flow of human beings to America. So Native Americans are Altaic. They're not the Han grouping at all. And this thing is so much fun. We traveled with Ramsey in southern China and in Laos and it was just a fascinating trip, and we came into contact with a lot of these tribal, what they're called tribal people, the Doxy, the Thai people in southern China. And I'll show you a language map for them a little bit later. But hey, let's get back to Mongols. So the other point I want to make is it's not only was the genetics all mixed up in Asia, it's all mixed up in Eastern Europe. And you look at different ethnic groups. And what's ethnic group? Well, it's just a consolidation of language and culture, and in many cases, a civilization. And I just want to take one group, the Hungarians, and what a mix they are. Now, here's the color coding. So just notice Polish and Polish-like, all the red and pink hues across. So where's Poland? Poland is right in the middle of Eastern Europe. So guess what? They're going to be represented genetically everywhere. So a lot of Polish or Polish-like blood. But what about these colors? The Uyghur-like. The tan are more the Altaic. The Uyghurs are Turk, are Altaic. Mongols are Altaic. There's some Turkish blood in Europe. Who has that? The Romanians, because they lived right on the edge of the Ottoman Empire. Anyway, we could spend a lot of time looking at this, but the point I'm making is the genes are mixed up. And so what's much more useful as we explore what civilization is to look at the language. The spoken language is the first approximation of civilization. And I say and emphasize the word spoken language because in Asia, you have the amazing language of the Chinese, which are ideograms. It's not phonetic, not at least in the beginning. Now there's some elements now of phonetic writing, but the Japanese, their spoken language is Altaic, but their written language is kanji, which they've adapted from a civilization nearby them, So they're an interesting mix of spoken Altaic and written Chinese. And that's what is one of the advantages when you're looking at Chinese empire and hegemony, that they can teach people that don't speak a language that sounds like theirs, a completely different spoken language. You can teach a writing system. And it's the advantage from Northern and Southern Chinese between Cantonese and Mandarin. They've got the same written language, so that's always a helpful advantage. So let's look at the other Altaic groupings. You got the Mongol grouping, but this looms large, and it's going to loom larger and larger as we go through, and we finally get to 1500 and later. The Turkic languages, they've been out on the steppes for a long time, and they're spread, and there's little islands of them all across. There's some other more tribal languages, steppe languages that we've never heard of. But look here, the Korean language is an Altaic grouping. It's not Chinese. It's a completely different spoken language system. And unsurprisingly, they had an enlightened king who wrote out a phonetic alphabet. centuries ago, I think 1600s. So they're on a completely different track than China. Japan adopted the kanji, but they've got something like what the Koreans did in hiragana and katakana, which is a more phonetic what would you all call it? A subsidiary alphabet that they lean on, is particularly for foreign words. So Japan's just a totally interesting mix. But now they are Altaic. Now it's not like there's no controversy, because anytime you're dealing with the Japanese and the Koreans, and you're bunching them together, it becomes very, very problematic. And the study of the genes that's where the answer is. But there's the academics in both Japan and China really resist the conclusions of the genetics, which seem to suggest, according to Jared Diamond, that Japanese are a branch of Korean. That doesn't go down well someplace. And this also, I think, helps with the mystery of the Ainu. So Juan Jose in the very North Islands of Japan, there are fair-skinned, very hairy people. And they are no doubt ultra Altaic, and work their way over this way, whereas other immigrations to Japan came through Korea, and they may have been, who knows, Indo-European in the beginning. Now, so that's Altaic. Just a brief word about the dominant elephant in the room, the Chinese civilization. And this is their language, and where it's now dominant. And it's a first approximation of civilization, language. And the Vietnamese took to it, certainly more than the Koreans did. And there's some other interesting spots, but our focus isn't on China today. Juan and Jose and I did China all the way up to the year 500 through the Han dynasty. And we're going to get back, especially when our Western Europe civilization reestablishes contact with China. And we'll go back to China and review it. Okay. So the Altaic grouping, and I like these language trees. Juan Jose and I did this, and maybe some of you joined us when we did Judaism. We did this with the Semitic language, and how close it is to Phoenician, it's fun. So you follow the development of the language over time, and finally you get to classical or Middle Mongolian about the time of Genghis Khan, and they've languages evolved within the Altaic language, and then within one major branch you get all these dialects, of course. So I just want to go through real quick as a broad overview the sequence of the Altaic spoilers. So we've talked about we've talked about the Indo-European invaders from the steppes many times, and now the Indo-European steppe people have finally all left the steppes. And who were the last Indo-European steppe people? I'll give you a second. Juan Jose maybe knows. We covered them in detail. The Kushans. The Kushans were a tribe living uneasily with the Altaic nomads on the northern and western borders of China. And finally, the Huns, or their proto-Huns, said, we're in charge now, get out of here. So the Kushans headed west and became conquerors themselves, conquering the Silk Road and a lot of northern India, which put them in a very good position to set up Silk Road trade all the way across. By the time they got to this area, Alexander had been there a couple of centuries before. So Alexander was kind of the trail setter. The Kushans got there, and they set up an empire. They knew the Chinese, they'd been the Chinese, there was communication back and forth. Rome now had taken over, and here was the weak link, the Persian part of it. But it could be negotiated, and Chinese items did appear in the Mediterranean, along this, being traded along the Silk Road. The next Altaic invader we'll talk about are the Huns. Who knows what the Huns are? They're a mix of Turks and Mongolians, as we saw from the genetic map. They're going to be a mishmash of everything, but Huns are what they say they are. They're self-defined. We're raiders, and by God, we've taken care of the Chinese, and we're going to come over here, and we're taking the Kushans out, and we're going in and taking northern India for ourselves. And by the way, we'll just go all the way across with Attila, and we'll be part of the destruction of Rome. And some of them maybe wind up in Hungary. So the mystery of who are the Hungarians, I think, is partially theoretically answered by the Huns. The next wave of Altaic raiders, we've talked about this now. Around the year 1000, we get the Seljuk Turks actually coming south and causing a lot of trouble for the Arabs. They take over the Holy Land, which is an insult, even more so to the Crusaders. They're sitting there watching all this, and they say, wait a minute, the people of the book are no longer in charge of Jerusalem. Let's go. It's not that they love the Arabs, but the Turks were one conqueror too far. So, but the Turks just kept coming. Their cousins, the Ottomans, eventually take over in 1453. And that's all she wrote. But the Byzantine Empire starts shrinking bit by bit. Then here we are now. We're at the Mongol phase of Altaic intrusion into the Europe and areas west of Asia proper. And we know a lot about the Mongols because as soon as Genghis died, the scribes sat down and wrote down everything about him. So we have a better history of Genghis than we do of, say, Muhammad. The Quran was not really set down for 100 years after Muhammad died. Christianity was luckier. We had Paul to put his thoughts to paper pretty quick, within a few decades after Christ's death. Then who's the next wave? The Mongols aren't the last. Here's Tamerlane, Turkic. He invades Baghdad and India, and Mughal could stand for Mongol, because the invader of India is half Mongolian and half Turkish from Tamerlane. And Tamerlane's empire was quite large. So first you recover from the Mongols, and then you got Tamerlane. The poor Persians, they were just hit one wave after another. The same for the people of the Anatolian people. But note Samarkand, this was his capital, and Bukhara, these are names that come up. Khiva, you heard that name in the very beginning when we were talking about Russia. Russia's beef was the Khivans were holding white slaves, and that was an insult too far. So the Russians started coming down. And here's Babar. He was the main descendant of Timur and Genghis. So he tied together these two Altaic branches. And his was arguably the last big invasion from the steppes. So Juan Jose and I have been talking about invaders from the steppes ever since writing began. It was a problem in Mesopotamia. The wild people from the north. They also, wild people from the north, the Aryans, also conquered India, wiped out Indus civilization, went in and did a reset in the Greek Isles. So the Greeks became Aryans. The energy for Greek culture arguably came from the steppes. But this is probably the last big invasion. So Juan Jose, no more steppes. What happened to all these Altaic people? They became the Stans: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan. So, you know, you always look, if you have a little foundation in history, you're always looking at echoes in today's news. And so this big kick up that we just had in Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh, what's that all about? And how's come Turkey got involved? Turkey went in and fought on the sides of the Azers. And the reason that Erdogan did that is that from Turkey, he now has control of a Turkish belt that goes all the way from Eastern Turkey through now a Turkish land after they kicked out Armenians, now through Azerbaijan, and all the way through Kazakhstan, they're Turkish, all the way to their friends, the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs. Do you wonder?
Can I add something?
Why China is so anxious about the Uyghurs? Yes.
What I wanted to add was this goes to show you that the Turkish people were in where the Uyghurs are in Western China in Xinjiang province. This is where the Chinese are throwing them all into re-education camps. But our friend Oliver Dunlap, who some of you may know, Ollie studied in Turkey, so he knew fluent Turkish. Well, he was traveling in Xinjiang province where the Uyghurs lived. and he started talking to them in Turkish, and they understood him.
Yeah, yeah. You know, if you know this stuff, and you see that there's a continuity here, and there's this Turkic belt, then you understand, like, well, why is China getting involved in the politics of Syria? Well, China was getting involved with Russia in the politics of Syria to counter Turkey, who they, in the long term, they see as a potential threat to their loosely held Western border. And that's why they're clamping down so hard. They want to set up, they want to build a wall on their border, essentially. They see this as a Trojan horse that could chip away at the great nation of China. Anyway, history helps explain a little bit the present, if you got the concepts down. So I started my talks on Russia is their main contribution to the flow of history in that part of the world was to attain the steppes. Initially, it was to stop slavery. The Khivans, Turkic Khivans, capturing their people in southern Russia and enslaving them. And finally, in the 1850s, they were successful. Now, today, I try to stop. My goal is to stop at 1500 so we can get back to the Renaissance. I haven't forgot the Renaissance, but I want to fill in Russia because Russia is going to be so important, and I want to fill it in pretty well up to 1500 so you can see what their mindset was. And I'm going to take some liberties and go a little bit beyond 1500 later on. And here's one example, Dertsu the Trapper. So once they took over the steppes, the Russians they continued like American cowboys to tame that part of the world. And Dertsu was like an Indian guide that Lewis and Clark might have had. And it was made into, his story was made into a movie by Kurosawa, Japanese movie, Dertsu Uzala. It'll give you an understanding a little bit of what happened to the Mongolians when the Russians came down. Genghis's first target was this big, juicy civilization. China had the biggest, most sophisticated, developed civilization, certainly more than any Altaic people had. Although Tamerlane and Samarkand did pretty well. His first target is going to be to the south. Just to fill in a little bit on the Chinese language before we see what happens to them under the Mongols, there are different dialects. So here's the Qin dialect. Here's Mandarin. Here's Urumqi. So the dialects that they speak in Uyghur land. Obviously, a lot of different dialects in Taipei, and you get to southern China, and you get these tribal dialects that we encountered on the roads down there. Of course, the vast majority is Mandarin. Mandarin is now mandated in schools, and the people of Hong Kong spoke Cantonese, but they're learning Mandarin. That was part of the deal in 1997. That's an introduction. the Mongols are about ready to conquer the world. And what does the world look like just before the Mongols take off? If you looked at this map, who would have predicted that this little Mongol, you wouldn't even call it a nation, a chieftain, a tribe, a warlord, consolidated power of nomads. There's no established cities, which is almost required for civilization. And who would have predicted that this little place would come down, attack the Jin, eventually attack Korea, eventually attack Japan, eventually take over both these dynasties and set up their own Yuan dynasty. Here, the Uyghurs sitting here, they're going to be part of the politics that we've and are today, as we've been discussing. And so where we left off with the Russians is they're sitting here peacefully minding their own business. They've kind of splintered into Kiev, and now Novgorod has established its own area of hegemony, but things are getting along pretty good. We know we've got a huge cultural wall between Catholicism and Orthodox that runs here, separating Poland and Lithuania off. But here's Hungary. And Hungary is going to be the furthest western reach of the Mongols. They're going to get all the way over to Hungary. Vienna was pretty nervous. Where's Moscow? It's nowhere. It doesn't exist. All right, off we go. And here are the years. First they go south, they take the Western Xia, then they go after the Jin, and then they, I'm gonna skip because I want, in the interest of time, then they start heading west, Kabul, then Bukhara, Samarkand, the Turks fall before them. And then now they're getting into Christian territory. Georgia is Christian. On their first sweep, they look up and say, oh man, we're getting tired. Let's go back home. We'll leave Kiev for 17 years later. So they turn around, they wipe out Bulgaria, and come back home. So this is the first wave. Wave number one, Kiev is spared. The siege of Beijing, China, the Battle of the Indus, and all along they're setting up infrastructure. So this is a signaling tower that they used. They had methods of communication. Genghis Khan was a sophisticated strategist. He also set up hostelries along the Silk Road, places where you could switch horses, like in the Pony Express. So he's going to build some infrastructure that is actually going to be helpful. Whether it's worth all the killing and violence is another question. Here's the second wave. So they go back. I think it's Genghis's son leads this. But basically what I wanted to show you was when they get to Kiev. Boy, that the printing's pretty small here. But the second wave goes much further, gets into Hungary, and here is a depiction of what it might have looked like. And of course, reenactments, the Mongolian people are very proud of their warlord. And last week, someone said, well, did they take their wives? Not many, but you could take some, and I'm sure there were comfort women, but probably not many. They probably found comfort with the spoils of war, unfortunately. But look at how many oxen are pulling these things. So yeah, they're nomads and they don't need roads, but they need some roads for supplies. So this is well thought out. And you can see that Genghis, once he got into China, he captured the military architects and said, show me what you got. And he made them an offer they couldn't refuse. And he was using the latest Chinese technology, including gunpowder, which was why he was successful. I showed this last week. Let's just show it again. I'll read off the dates. 06, 19, 23, 27, 37, 59, 79, 94. So 94 is when they kind of consolidate and settle down and said, wow, that was a pretty successful century. Let's settle, consolidate, and we'll just have people send us tribute. You can call it collecting taxes if you want. But it settled down into these three major areas. The yellow one is the Golden Horde. And since the topic is, after all, Russia, that we're going to focus on the Golden Horde. Here is the Mongol Empire. Interestingly, somehow Kiev is left off of this map, but believe me, it was close enough that they were under control. By 2090, they're in all across the Black Sea. Certainly have cut Kiev off from Constantinople. Where's Russia? Where's Moscow? Still no Moscow. And they break it their empire up and they take over and become the Yuan dynasty. But look, they got Korea, but what about Japan? Huh. Well, I don't know. So now we got Christianity involved, and the first Christians to fall are Georgia, who had a queen, Tamara. I didn't know that. Tamara the Great, in fact. Now, here's your question. If Stalingrad was the bloodiest battle in history, what was the second bloodiest battle? I'll give you a second. Think to yourself, what did he say was the second bloodiest battle? The Siege of Baghdad, 1258. So this is it. The Mongols have adapted. Hey, we're going to go Chinese. We like their civilization. We're even going to establish a dynasty, which is totally incompatible with this Islam thing. So they go all in on Abyssinian Islam. This the 2 million casualties, just 0.5 million under the casualties at Stalingrad. Now, Russia is finally going to overcome the Mongols, but it's going to take another 200 years. 200 years. So here's a picture of the catastrophe in Baghdad, an approximation of what it must have looked like. It's come down through history. There's still no Moscow, but here's the Golden Horde. Now they've set up Russians. You can live peacefully, but you've got to bring us tribute. And so Kiev was part of this tribute system for sure. And then we have these other empires. Here's the empire of Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan. So let's talk about Kublai Khan. What did Kublai Khan want? He wanted Japan. And he launched two major invasions. The first one was repelled by conventional means. The samurai were there to greet him, Kublai learned that the Japanese were a warrior culture like Europe. We had knights, they had samurai. And so a warrior culture was able to repel a conventional invasion. Well, Kublai said, okay, assemble a huge fleet. We're going to overwhelm them with numbers, and we'll go back in 1281. So on 1281, off they go from two directions. They'd conquered Korea, and they launch a huge armada that is gonna take over Kyushu, and that's gonna be the end of Japan, except for this great typhoon, divine wind. Kami is like God, Kazi is wind. So the wind of the gods, the divine winds. We know a later Japanese military strategy that appropriated that term. And the divine wind, a typhoon on that particular day, crushed Kublai Khan's dreams of capturing Japan. And after Japan, they stretch out in Hungary. They're there. They're in physical control. Remember, the Hungarians are a good part Altaic themselves. The rest of Europe is Indo-European. But the Finns and the Hungarians have an interesting mix of Altaic. So the Russian boyars, what happened to them? These boyars, remember, they are descended from Vikings. Well, the Altaics captured them, put them under their eating table and crushed them. That was the Mongol statement of who was in charge, and it's very definitely this is Altaic now, not Indo-European. So this is just an interesting look at, well, what are the relative populations? We've finished the Middle Ages. About 100 years after this, in 1450, but the Holy Roman Empire was the most populous. Then came France, but in third place came the Golden Horde. Here's the Golden Horde over here, and they controlled a lot of people. Going down the list, the England we know is in fifth place, but now you're going to get like Poland. That's pretty healthy. Hungary. So you combine those two, you almost have 6 million. Novgorod, we've been talking about a lot, kind of small. 12. Sweden is huge, but doesn't have many people. But look, here comes Lithuania. This is the one that I'll stop with on this list. Lithuania is coming. Lithuania is geographically big, and they're gonna combine with Poland. Once we get past 1500, they'll combine with Poland to become the Commonwealth, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And they will be the largest geographic entity in all of Europe. We don't realize that. And they will expand. They will expand down all the way to the Black Sea, all the way to the Black Sea. And this comes into our politics today, because they're taking over the western half of what we call the Ukraine today. That is culturally Lithuanian, Polish area. The thing that turbocharges Poland and Lithuania is that they eventually become part of the Habsburg Empire. And we learned when we did the Habsburgs, and their wonderful history that ties in Spain and Juana the Mad and Holland. We learned, and that's why we did them first, because they tied in so much. And then they take Austria and Vienna and make it the capital of Austro-Hungary. And the empire eventually includes Bohemia, Poland, and Lithuania in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. All that is what lays ahead. It's just nice to know what the basis for these big groupings that we're going to be dealing with in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. It's nice to just kind of review where they came from. And this just blows the map up a little bit so you can see it more. So the Mongols celebrate Genghis today. This is the largest freestanding statue in the world, or equestrian statue, I should say. And he meant business. And he's been.
Where is John? Where is that?
In the middle of Mongolia somewhere. It's not Ulaanbaatar. It's the best guess of where his little home tribe was, but they don't know where Genghis is buried. His tomb has been lost to posterity, but he lives on the money and on the side of the hills. And there is a mausoleum for it, but with just ready to receive his body. Reminders of him all over the place. And the point I'm making is they're digging and they're looking, and there's speculation that they are going to find Genghis Khan's body. It's only a matter of time. And when they do, they'll find a skeleton like this. And what they'll do is go to the ear. For some reason, deep in the ear is where DNA is most likely to still be reconstructable, if not intact. And they've done this in India in particular to show that the great Indian empires were in fact Indo-European, Aryan. The Brahmins, the upper part of the caste system, they were Indo-European, Aryan. To call them Persian would not be correct, but from that area where Iran is now, and it's been proven by DNA. And when they get Genghis's DNA, they'll know it's him, because there's the study of DNA, which is as we saw in the first slide today, so fascinating. Has established that through looking at the Y chromosomes and the derivation of the Y chromosomes, has established that about 900 years ago, there was a super male who spread his Y chromosome all across the land, so that now 6 million men carry his Y chromosome. Now that's compound interest over many centuries. But how many children did he sire from, not just his wives, but from all the plunder and booty and rape and pillage? And there's one guy, quite a few, and if they find a guy with that DNA, they'll take him back and they'll put him in the mausoleum, and 6 million men will go and make a pilgrimage. So Kublai, one thing I want to say about Kublai was his wife. So a big point I want to make, and I made it when we did the history of women, the first 4,000 years of civilization and women, was that nomadic women had more rights. As soon as we settled down and became the agricultural revolution, kind of took away some of the rights that the nomadic women kind of had. If there are two of you out walking around on a plane, you'd better have a good partnership. But you get a farm, the man does more of the heavy lifting that has to be done. He gets possessive. he thinks he can boss people around. He comes up with a book that's defines women as being the source of evil in the Garden of Eden. He does all kinds of mischievous things, but the pure case is Genghis and his wife move in, Chabe, move in and become the rulers, the emperor and empresses of the Yuan dynasty. And look what this is the history book that Ramsey gave us when we did our tour of world history. I think it was 12 years ago. Chabe displayed independent mindedness and political savvy. Do you think that she had her daughter's feet bound? No, she did not allow her daughter's feet to be bound. That was not gonna fly. And she was given a role as a chief advisor. Yes, there had been empress dowagers in China, mainly the mothers of emperors who had died, but only two come to mind. This is the only one of Mongol, and she had a lot of power. She gave advice. She interacted with the mandarins, and was a good influence. But she did not fit into the Confucian algorithm, not at all. Finally, Kublai's on the throne, and now we're going to get an interesting link to Europe. Whether it happened or not is another question. But here's the thing. People think it happened. So it doesn't matter how much of Marco Polo's story is true. He woke all of Europe up. There was enough truth in it to wake Europe up to the existence of this fabulous civilization that had been on the far end of what McNeill called the East-West acumen. So Mediterranean in the far west, China in the far east. And it's the end of the road. It's not a crossroads. It's the end of the line. And yeah, they got people coming down from the north, the warlords of the north, but they built a great wall, and they were doing relatively well in establishing what we would call a civilization, And we'll resume with the Tang. The Han achieved remarkable civilization. They ended around 200 CE, but they'd put together a pretty remarkable civilization built on Confucian principles. And then the trade. So they set up, the Mongols set up infrastructure so the trade could flow. If you wanted to be a bandit on the Silk Road, you thought twice, knowing that the Mongols were policing it. And so you get this flow of trade. And the Silk Road had existed under the Arabs, but guess what? The Arabs, they were heavy toll collectors. So you had to deal with this, and they were not always open to allowing Christian goods to flow without a heavy tariff. The Mongols, the trade probably increased more, and that was good business for places like Venice and Genoa, who could get up to the Crimea and enter the Silk Road that way. The Arabs, after the Mongols took over, still had the seas, so the Arabs didn't fold completely. So this is probably going to be a good place to stop. Yeah. So when we return, Russia's finally standing up to the Mongols, and we'll do finally the end of the Mongol dominance of Russian society after 300 years. And that is why Russia is different. As Europe is going through and enjoying the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, Russia is still recovering from being held captive. And remember, Russia didn't start until the late 800s. So number one, they got a late start, and number two, they had 300 years of being totally dominated and suppressed. So of course they're going to have a different culture. All right, so this will be a good place to stop. Questions?
John, this is Carol. I have several questions. So while Genghis is off conquering lands, what's happening in Mongolia? Is his wife back ruling, or?
Well, he had sons, and the sons, his sons, I think were okay, and they were the ones that kind of divided the areas up. But the grandsons, that's always the problem, the passage of power from one generation to the next. And before you knew it, you had the usual quarrel that you had between warlords. I would say that in Mongolia itself, everybody had moved south into China. Why live on the plains of Mongolia if you got a cousin who is a governor of a prosperous Chinese area? So I think a lot of Mongols wound up under the Yuan dynasty inside China, and they were still a military presence. So when Kublai Khan needed an army, I would guess half of that army are Mongols. So they're adventurous people. They're nomadic. they don't have a civilization that'll hold them in one place if there's a better alternative.
So another question I had was if not Kublai Khan, but if Genghis Khan is moving and conquering all of these lands, and the only thing I can think of is, that makes it worthwhile is he can get tribute, because the Europeans were so much more backward in terms of their what they had to offer. I thought, am I in the wrong century?
Well, it all depends. By 1200, there were vast trade routes. What really impressed us was we'd been to Regensburg, and when we went to an exhibition about Russia, we heard that Novgorod had a direct trade route to Regensburg on the Danube. So there was a lot of trade. It's not necessarily that the stuff was produced there, but these areas had enough surplus wealth to trade for luxuries. So
Right. And from the Renaissance, I know from Venice, a lot of Italy, the reason those merchants were so successful is because they could bring in products from China
right.
and India. But I don't know, what did China and India get? I guess money?
Uh,
Want money?
Well, I hate to say it, but there were slaves that were traded along that route. Slaves from that had been taken in Africa, and what we're going to see next time is natural resources from the north, in particular fur. We don't think of fur these days
Oh,
as being
yeah,
a commodity,
like ermine would be important.
but in those days, you know, and the further north the animal was from, the thicker the fur, the higher the price. So I'm spoiler
Right.
alert. This is how Russia bridges its economic development to the age of oil and gas. Fur.
I remember even in the 1950s, it was such a status symbol for women in the United States to have a mink coat or a mink stole.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Also, I looked up that statue of Genghis Khan. It's 33 miles east of Ulaanbaatar, and a spot where Genghis Khan was supposed to have found a golden whip.
There you go.
Thank you, John. Sorry I was late.
No problem. Oh, listen, we were late.
Oh, good.
I'm
Good,
sorry.
Carol. You know, I was hiking with Neil, Carol's husband, and I told